Okay, this video is going to focus on the start of the chunk 3 of the topic of operations, and that being operations processes. I'll briefly run in or introduce what processes are and then make a start on inputs, which is the first key element of operations processes. So to date we've been talking about and looking at the different roles of operations. So for example, what's the strategic role of operations and interdependence between operations and other key business function. So that was with respect to role. Okay, then we looked at some of the key influences on operations like globalization, the environment, corporate social responsibility, for example. Now we're moving on to, okay, what's the actual process that occurs within the operations department of a business? So operations processes, as the diagram below sort of attests to, relates to the processes that relate to the transformation of inputs into outputs. So what does a business actually go through? What steps do they go through to take those inputs? So, over here, in that first diagram, you've got some ingredients. We refer to them as materials. Then they are transformed, and we consider things like volume, variety, variation, demand. So how much volume do we need of the input, and then to ultimately achieve the output, so the delivery to the customer, and also to a degree after sales service like customer service. That's the overall operations process. We're going to break it down into the key elements of the key elements of inputs, the key elements of the transforming processes, and then the key elements of outputs. And today we'll start with inputs. And that's really what I've just been talking about. That's just straight out of the syllabus, but in a diagrammatic form, showing you what are the key elements to inputs, what are the key elements of transformation, and what are the key elements of outputs. Okay, so this will start off with looking at these key transform resources, being materials, information, and customers. As a bit of a precursor to that, there are really 4 common inputs that a business will use, be it doesn't matter if it's producing a good or if it's a service-based business, that will allow it to ultimately achieve the output that it wants via the transforming. And that would be labour, so people and human effort, energy in terms of electricity or fuel, because it's generally required to be able to carry out some sort of task, even if it's producing a product or delivering a service. Raw materials in some form, they might some sort of components to produce a good, and then machinery or technology particularly for service-based businesses, but obviously also for manufacturing or production style businesses. Technology is a really important part. So as I said before, resources or inputs, can be divided into those that are transformed or those that are transforming. And this video is going to focus on the transformed inputs, being materials, information, and customers. And then the next video will focus on transforming, which are human resources and facilities. So transform resources are the inputs which are changed or converted into something else, such as a component or a finished good. So if we go back, materials are changed or altered. Information is taken and altered, and the customer, via its experience, it is altered. Okay, so materials, what do we mean by materials? They're basic raw materials or basic elements that are used in the production process, and they consist of raw materials and intermediate goods, and basically generally known as direct materials. They're the essential substances in their unprocessed state. For example, coal or iron ore, and usually come from places like a mine, as those 2 examples I just gave you would, from a forest, from the ocean, or potentially even from recycled waste. Intermediate goods are goods that are manufactured and used in the further manufacturing or processing. So they're materials, but they're not in their raw form. They're intermediate, so they've already had some they've already had some change occur to them. So an example of raw materials might be these raw materials, so silicates, copper, oils, and plastics, which are the inputs which are then transformed to achieve an element of a computer processing system. Another example could be silicon chips, plastics, metals, and labour in order to produce a computer. So those inputs, they are then changed or altered and then ultimately turn it into a computer. Information is another key input and a transform resource. Information is the knowledge gained from research, investigation, and instruction, which results in an increase in understanding. So taking that information and increasing the level of understanding of someone, which is just as an important transform resource. It's stored in files, in computer programs, databases, and it could even be in the human brain. It's used to execute operations and keep control over material inputs. And it acts as a transform resource when it's used to inform how inputs are used, where they are drawn from, which suppliers and supplies are available. Information could be external, so it could be taken from pieces of information outside the business itself. It also could be internal. So there's some example here of some financial data for Qantas. That's internal information for the business. It's key information that they're going to use to be able to undertake that transformation process. Okay, the third input and transform resource are customers. So they're an important input, or they are an input because it's their needs and desires that drive the operations of the business. Their choices shape additional inputs and processes. So what the customer wants to a degree is then influences the transformation that occurs and ultimately is delivered in the output. Businesses might use customer relationship management, so a computer system to better understand their clients so they can track and collect data of their customers and remain in contact to better understand the needs and wants of those customers through feedback. So, for example, you go to Rebel Sport, you purchase a product, they always ask for your postcode. They're trying to get a better understanding about who their customers are so that they can deliver to the customer they're in line with their desires and needs of those customers. Okay, and the next video is going to focus on transforming resources.